Awesome. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into some of these arguments. I don't have a lot drawn up on my outline. We're going to introduce them, and I'll see if I have anything intelligent to say on them, which I probably won't. But the first argument we're looking at is the argument from sets. So Squared, do you want to talk about like what this is and what's going on here? All I think about when I hear of sets is just like my terrible days in pre-calc. So what's going on here?
Right. Okay. So I'm going to try and move through these fairly quickly because some of these have lots of explanation behind them, and we have quite a few to go through. So the argument from sets, we're going to start off with, okay, two views in the philosophy of mathematics that are divided on the nature of mathematical entities. So stuff like numbers, functions, sets, or geometrical shapes. What are these things? On one side of the aisle, you have the realists who think that these things exist. On the other side, you have the anti-realists who think these things don't exist. We're going to be looking, okay, which side of the aisle you go to, realism, anti-realism. That's a huge debate, but we're going to continue on as if you're accepting all the arguments for realism. Some of those, an argument like that might look like 7 is prime is a true statement, and that looks like Jim is tall. Jim is tall. If that's true, that commits me to the existence of Jim. So if 7 is prime, that commits me to the existence of the number 7. Okay, so in realism, there are lots of views. One of them is conceptualism, and that's that these things like numbers, functions, sets, they are thoughts in the mind of God. Another view is kind of like, what's the name of it? Well, there's another view that these abstract objects, they kind of have like their own independent existence. They're not in the mind of God.
Is it like Platonism?
Yeah, Platonism. So this argument, the argument from sets, is that if you're going to be a realist, you can't be like a Platonist. You've got to be a conceptualist. So if you're going to be a realist, you can only be a conceptualist. And if you can only be a conceptualist, well, you got to commit yourself to the existence of God for these, the mind for these abstract objects to exist in. Okay, why might you think that? Well, we're actually going to have to get into set theory. So set theory is, broadly speaking, trying to mathematically formalize the concept of a collection. So you could have a collection of prime numbers, or an infinite collection of all the prime numbers. That's the set of all prime numbers. Or you could have a collection of all four-sided shapes. That's the set of all four-sided shapes. We could also have like non-mathematical sets, like the set of all humans or the set of all countries, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, what makes something a set? Like, what kinds of sets are there? If you want to mathematically be precise, is there a set of all sets? Is there a set that doesn't have anything in it? Is there a set which contains itself? So what the original conception of set theory was that if you have a property, then you can have a set which contains all the things with that property. The problem is that that actually arrives at a contradiction with Russell's famous paradox. You could talk about the set of all sets which do not contain themselves. And for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to try and spell out that contradiction, but the basic idea is if the set contains itself, then it should contain itself, but if it doesn't contain itself, then it should contain itself. So you can't actually just say that any sort of property gives you a set. Okay, so what kinds of things are sets then? Well, the current conception of set theory is very, very intelligent. It's Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory. What it does is it structures sets hierarchically. So we start with, like, say, the empty set, the set that doesn't contain anything, and then we have rules to build more sets based off of the sets we already have. So I go from the set which contains nothing to the set which contains the set which contains nothing, and then I could have the set of the set that contains nothing as well, and also the set of the set which contains nothing. You start building up hierarchically. And these rules that give you more and more sets can give you infinitely large sets. And it actually doesn't stop there. It could give you sets which are even bigger than the infinitely large sets. And it could give you sets which are bigger than those infinitely large sets. And we could keep going iteratively, making bigger and bigger infinite sets. And then we could take this like iterative hierarchy and put all those sets in one big set and start the process of all over again and making even bigger sets. And do that iteratively and make even bigger sets and so on and so forth. So you could just have like endless upon endless sets, fun times. So now we're going to go back to the conceptualist and the Platonist. The Platonist is going to say that these kinds of sets exist if their members exist. Like, what explanation is for the existence of these sets? The members exist. What's going to be the explanation on conceptualism? Well, God's thinking about those sets. Cool. Now the problem is that these sets are like actually existing things under realism. So we could just like we could step outside for a second. We could imagine that we're actually looking at all those sets. They're just before us, and it's all really pretty because I imagine sets as glowy orbs, but that's just me. So we look at all this glowy orbs, and I'm like, hey, all those sets over there, they exist, right? So why isn't there a set which contains all of them? Like, that's a question I have. Why isn't there a set which contains all of them? And then, my interlocutor might say, hold on, the iterative hierarchy doesn't allow you to have a set of all sets. A set which is defined as containing all sets is impossible. I'm like, okay, I get that, but all those sets over there, all those glowy orbs I'm looking at, why isn't there a set which contains them? If it did exist, then the rules would take off and start building sets on top of the one that I just produced. So it's not going to be the set of all sets for very long, but why doesn't that set currently exist? And that's actually a really difficult question to answer, because on the Platonist account, those if the members of a set exist, then the set itself should exist. So that this mysterious set we're thinking of, there's no real explanation under Platonism for why it doesn't exist. Under conceptualism, though, you can give a very interesting account of the nature of sets. On this account, sets aren't necessarily existing things. On realist accounts, it's usually thought of that like numbers and functions and all these things are necessarily existing. But maybe sets aren't necessarily existing. They are the product of God's mental activity. He has to think about creating a set. He has to do the free choice to build a set. So under this account, the reason why there isn't a set of all those glowy orbs that I'm looking at, all those sets, is because God just hasn't freely decided to do it. So we can actually make an explanation for that. And, okay, so hold on. Does that mean God could have decided to just not think of any sets? Well, yes, but God is a good God, so he would presumably create sets so that our mathematical formulas that we write on chalkboards and stuff, and those sets that we're talking about, do actually refer to something. So God has at least thought of those sets.
Then, there could be, other sets that, God just hasn't created, in terms of, thinking, the mathematical landscape?
Yeah, so under this theory, under this view of conceptualism, there are going to be sets in possible worlds that God has not thought of in the actual world.
So how does this relate to mathematics? Because if you think of something like 2 + 2 = 4, you think that that'd be true in all possible worlds, and at least conceivable world where God doesn't exist, but 2 + 2 = 4. So in that sense, you might have mathematical realism to some degree. And I'm just trying to track with what exactly the argument from sets what's the heart of the argument with regards to what these sets are.
Okay, the heart of the argument is, why aren't there more sets than there actually are? That's going to be a very difficult question to answer if you're a Platonist. If you're a conceptualist, then you could say God hasn't thought of more sets. So that's the heart of the argument.